Alright, we're back. We're recording. Let's get this show back on the road. You got the remote, Fred. Boom. Clock's running. I need to change this.
Pandemonium.
Get the hell out of here. We got this, buddy.
She just joined. You ever seen her?
She was quickly disassembled that
Was she there yesterday or
all
today?
except for Oswald, right?
Maybe. I think if she's the person I'm thinking of, I think I saw her yesterday when you were handing out the challenge things. She was wearing a like olive green jacket.
Possibly.
Yeah, I think if she's the person I'm thinking of.
Smells gunpowder.
The character produced credentials from his pocket that showed him to be Secret Service.
Let's see your ID. You see anybody else up here?
No, keep looking.
So I accepted that.
Pause it for a
let him go
second.
and
Dealey Plaza at this time was home to many Dealey Plaza and the area surrounding Dealey Plaza. I don't know. Today it's called the Earl Cabell Federal Building. It's on Commerce. I don't know if that federal building existed in 1963, but Dealey Plaza itself, the area surrounding Dealey Plaza, was home to many government offices, and a lot of those people had badges that looked similar to Secret Service badges with a 5 or 6 pointed star. So that person could have been anyone. It could have been a postal inspector, it could have been a tax inspector, it could have been a game and wildlife inspector, it could have been anybody, you know?
And in a frantic state like that, when the president just got shot, there's been a shooting and the president's going through the streets, and you're a police officer, if someone shows you a badge, you're not going to sit there and examine it for a long time.
Yeah.
When there's more things you should probably be doing in that emergency, you're going to look at it real quick and keep going.
Yeah.
You're not going to be sitting there looking at his name, looking at the badge.
You don't have the time to.
There might be a shooter right there somewhere.
Yeah.
You want to go and search and try to find find out what happened, and potentially maybe even find a suspect.
Yeah. And that guy that they're saying was a Secret Service agent, he didn't like book it out of there. He stayed and helped the cops search the area.
Right.
So he wasn't in a hurry to get out of there.
How do we know that though?
It's from the testimony of the cop. The
Okay.
cop who said that this guy showed me a badge, and then the guy later on
Helped
in his
him
testimony-
search. Yeah, that's right.
He helped him search the area. Yeah.
Canada. He had on a sports shirt and pants, but he had dirty fingernails. Afterward, it didn't ring true, but at the time, we were so pressed for time.
It didn't look like dark complected
Service
man
in
at all.
Dallas that day are
Drop
counted.
the ball on that.
None were on foot in Dealey Plaza before or after the shooting, till Dallas Secret Service Chief Forrest Sorrells returned at 12:55. At least 12 other individuals were taken into custody by Dallas police. No record of their arrest. Men acting
That's
like
false.
hobos
Yep.
were being pulled off.
That's
the street,
actually like a straight up
marched to
lie,
Dealey
but
Plaza,
maybe he didn't know
and
that
there's no
because
record of
those
their
arrest
arrest.
records hadn't
They
been
had
released. That's me
But there are
being
other
nice and giving Jim Garrison the benefit of the doubt, you know?
Larry Floller was arrested. That guy in Fort Worth was arrested. There was several people arrested, and Jim Garrison would have known. He may not have known about the bombs, but there were other people that were arrested. And a lot of people like to say they. How do they usually say?
Why did
it?
they arrest those people? The other ones, not the bums.
I think it was like a suspicious thing, like they matched descriptions or something like that.
Were they arrested or detained?
They weren't charged with anything.
Okay.
They were. You can arrest someone without charging them. If you find that something exonerates them, they shouldn't be charged. You can release them, but they're still considered arrested at that point.
Oh yeah.
So they tend to say that there was a rush to judgment with Oswald. How is that a rush to judgment when you have all those people that they considered, and because they were cleared, they were released? And the only reason why they kept Oswald was because they kept finding things that linked him to 2 different killings.
Yeah.
So that's not a rush to judgment at all.
No, definitely not.
Find themselves as Secret Service agents all over the place.
Other than the
But who was
one
impersonating
cop who testified
was Lee
that
Harvey
somebody
Oswald?
showed him a badge,
Around
there's
12:15,
nobody who
on
identified
the way out
themselves
of
as
the
Secret
building to
Service.
see the motorcade, Secretary Carolyn Arnold sees Oswald in the second floor snack room, where he said he.
Pause this. Carolyn Arnold did not say, I saw Lee Harvey Oswald in the second floor lunchroom. When you read her account, she said she caught a fleeting glance at somebody who she thought might have been Oswald. That's very different from on her way out, Carolyn Arnold saw Oswald in the second floor lunchroom.
Right.
Went for a coat.
He was in a booth on the right side of the room. He
And
found
I
himself
don't
as
believe
usual.
Carolyn Arnold testified at the Shaw trial.
I didn't speak to him, but I recognized him clearly.
At the same time, Bonnie Ray Williams is supposedly eating his chicken lunch on the 6th floor. He's there until 12:15, maybe 12:20. He sees nobody.
It was a warehouse with a bunch of boxes. He was on the other side of the room. And when they found Oswald's rifle, he had cycled the bolt again, and there was another live round in the chamber ready to go. So maybe if Bonnie Ray Williams had seen him, he would have been the recipient of that round, you
Could
know?
have been. And we know that because when Real Fritz cleared it, he got a bullet out of it.
Yeah, it ejected, and it was a live round. It wasn't just a casing.
Yelling and all that. We thought they were security guys.
If Oswald was the assassin, he was certainly pretty nonchalant about moving himself into position. Later, he told Dallas police he was in the 2nd floor snack room. Probably told to wait there by his handler for a phone call. But the phone call never came.
That, like,
Max
Oswald
There
is...
was totally no time for that.
Yeah, Oswald is the best patsy ever. Hey man, I need you to do us a favor. Can you bring your rifle to work for us on the day when the president's driving by your workplace? And then right at the moment when the president's driving by your workplace, make sure nobody sees you and be alone by yourself in the lunchroom because we have to give you a call. We got some important stuff to tell you. Yeah, sure. Like, this guy is the most cooperative patsy ever. He's like willingly leading himself to the slaughter at that
And
point.
even if it
you
wasn't
know?
something that brief, if it was happened as they suggest, where the assassination was planned way in advance, he would have plenty of time to figure it out. Especially when the point came where they said to him, "We need you to bring a rifle to work."
Yeah.
30 seconds after Kennedy is shot, Patrolman Marion Baker runs into Oswald in that 2nd floor lunchroom.
Hey, you! You know this man is an employee.
Yes, he is. The president's been shot. But what the Warren Commission would have us believe is that after firing 3 bolt-action shots in 5.6 seconds, Oswald then leaves 3 cartridges neatly side by side in the fire.
He cycled the boat one more time
Watch
after the third shot.
fingerprints. Stashes the rifle
But he could have did it while he was
on the side
running.
of the lawn.
Yeah, he could have.
Sprints
Definitely
down,
true.
5 flights of
According to
stairs,
Brennan,
past witnesses
he
that
sat
poured
there
out
for a
of the
moment
chambers
after
like
the third
never
shot.
see him.
Pause it there. Those women descended the stairs a couple minutes after the shooting. When they got to the first floor, what's his face? The guy who gave him a ride into work, Frazier and Truly were at the bottom of the stairs, and we know that those 2 guys did not return to the depository building for a couple minutes after the shooting. Like I don't know exactly how long, but it was a little while after the shooting. Plus, I was in the depository today. The individual flights of stairs are separated, so unless you are on the exact same flight of stairs as another person, they will not be visible to you. It's not like a stairwell where you can look down the gap in between the stairs and see somebody coming up or going down. So
you have to come out onto the floor, walk probably about 8 feet before you re-enter the staircase again.
yeah,
And each flight is separated by, well, not each flight, but each floor. The stairs are separated by the floor itself.
yeah, and it's entirely possible because of the configuration of the stairwell that you and another person could be in the same stairwell at the same time and never see each
Very
other.
conceivable.
Yeah.
And people complain that, well, the ladies did not hear anybody else on the stairs. Well, in the 1960s, they commonly would wear footwear that made noise. Women would.
Yep.
And they're kind of like excited about what happened, and they're going down the stairs. They're making their own noise.
Yeah, probably talking to each other.
Yeah,
you know?
trying to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not trying to be discreet. Oswald could have been possibly trying to be discreet, and plus his shoes would have been softer. He's maybe not wanting to make very much noise when he's going down the stairs.
Yeah.
And even if they heard somebody going down the stairs, it's not something out of the ordinary. They would just assume this is probably another employee like them.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't even register that they're hearing it because it's such a common noise that they would hear when
Yeah,
down the stairs.
they wouldn't even think twice about it. Yeah.
Goes up cool and calm on the 2nd floor in front of Patrolman Baker.
See, like, here he's like trying to catch his breath. But Lee Harvey Oswald was a non-smoking 24-year-old ex-Marine. He should have been able to get down those stairs no problem. And during the Warren Commission investigation, Earl Warren himself did that. He went from the sniper's nest down the stairs to the second floor lunchroom at a normal walking pace, and he got there with plenty of time to spare.
I think he did it 72 or 74 seconds.
Yeah.
And when
Plenty of time.
Gary Mack tested it with a couple of guys, and they did it in like 41 seconds or something like that. And just to add to that, I told someone this today because they brought that up. I work in a building that is 6 floors. Sometimes I will test this. I have this in my mind each time I do it about Oswald descending the stairs.
Yeah.
I used to go down the stairs to see if I could do it, and of course, at twice Oswald's age, I can do it without breathing hard. So I try to do it. I actually went up the stairs, the same distance, and I can do that. Though I'm heavily breathing heavy, I can pretend not to be breathing heavy when I do that.
Yeah. You're almost twice Oswald's age?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. You look great, bro.
I'm beyond twice Oswald's age now. He was 24. I'm 49. I'm almost 50.
Oh my god, dude. I like underestimated your age by like 20 years, bro.
People do that.
Yeah, man. For those of you who can't see Fred James, take my word for it. He looks great.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, you're in good shape, buds. I hope I look half as good as that when I'm not gonna look half as good as that when I'm 50.
Absolutely not. Assuming he is a sole assassin, Oswald is now free to escape from the building. The longer he delays, the more chance the building will be sealed off.
Yeah.
Mostly ice now.
Is he guilty?
Actually, I kind of like that. I like watered down soda.
No.
I saw that sign today. I guess every floor had a sign indicating where the stairs were.
He strolls out the more distant front exit, where the cops have gathered.
You know what's ironic? Had he gone out the back door, he probably would have been caught right there, because they sealed the back door before they sealed the front door.
Oswald slips out, as do several other employees.
As do several other employees. Pause it for a second. This is a claim that I have heard many times, but I've never seen any substantiation for it. I understand the only employee missing from the depository after the shooting was Lee Harvey Oswald.
No, there was another guy missing. It was a black guy. He came back, but he was missing for a while. I can't think of his name right now.
Well, like, what was he missing, or was he
was
just like milling around?
He was
outside?
still milling around.
Yeah, so
unaccounted for in the building though.
Yeah, but he quickly showed up.
Returned way before they concluded Oswald was gone.
Yeah.
No, and I should take that back. He returned, but Oswald didn't. I should say that's better. I retract the first way I put that.
Yeah.
I just can't think of his name right now. I wish I could think of it. But it was a black guy. I know that.
He may have even known he was the patsy. An intuition, maybe. The president killed in spite of his warning. The phone call that never came. Perhaps fear now came to Oswald for the very first time.
That's total speculation that Oswald warned him that the phone call never came.
He said it was speculation.
I guess, yeah. Well, this is all speculation. Oh wow, we were there today. We were in that room today. I have a picture of myself on this guy's bed.
Two beeps on a car horn. The two uniformed cops pulled up to the house where Oswald was in his room like it was a signal or something. Officer Tippett is shot between 110 and 115, about a mile away. And though no one actually saw him walking or jogging, the government says Oswald covered that distance.
You know what?
By giving the government the benefit of the doubt,
We
Oswald
actually did that walk today. Now, unfortunately, I've never been to this area before, so I took a wrong turn, thus totally ruining the time frame that we had going there. But Fred James knew where he was going with Brock today. And in a comfortable walking place, how long did it take you guys to get there?
For that route, it was a Denver route through a park, which Jerry Dealey wanted to test. Not necessarily the route Oswald took.
It's not the most direct route.
It's a possible route he could have taken, and we did it in 1340 or 1350, something like that.
Yeah, so just under 14 minutes. And even with me and another guy, another Scott, it was Team Scott, we didn't know where we were going, and we went like a couple blocks in the wrong direction, and we still got to 10th and Patton in under 20 minutes.
I did the walk back in 2014. I took one of the direct routes. I think it was down Crawford Street, the Crawford Street route, and did it in 12:17, something like that.
Yeah.
My wife did it in a few seconds longer.
There's multiple routes that Oswald could have potentially taken to get him to 10th and Patton, But honestly, I don't think it matters. I think whatever route he took would have allowed him to get there in less than 15 minutes. If I had actually known where I was going, I'm pretty confident I could have gotten there. Because even walking the wrong way, stopping, talking, getting directions, double back, going, I had my clock running the whole time. I still got there in like less than 20 minutes. So this guy lived in that area. He would have been familiar with the layout of the streets in a way that I was not. He could have easily gotten to the scene of the Tippett shooting with enough time.
He could have walked it, but no one saw him. There's no reason to believe that he couldn't have run portions of that distance.
Or like a short little sprint, or maybe like a jog, or even just walking at a brisk pace.
He also could have crossed through yards, which we didn't do.
Yeah. He could have gone down alleyways, which we also didn't do.
We didn't do any of those.
It was a residential area in the middle of a day on a weekday. So most people would probably be at work, and the ones who weren't at work would probably be inside glued to their TVs or radios because the president just got shot.
Right.
They want to get the info. So nobody saw him walking or jogging. That doesn't really mean anything.
Well, toward the end of the route, they saw him because Helen Markin saw him. She thought he was walking eastbound, and Domingo Benavides. No, who was it? Scoggins. It was Scoggins, the cab driver. Thought he was going westbound.
Oh,
so
yeah.
2 people did see him, though it was at the end of the trek. 2 people did see him moving.
Okay, yeah. So there you go. There's another false claim right there.
There's a possibility J.D. Tippett could have saw him walking or running some of that distance, and that might be what could have, I speculate here, alerted Tippett to Oswald.
Yeah, he might have trailed him for a little bit because Tippett did try to contact dispatch to tell him he was going to stop somebody. He did try to call that in.
Dallas police officials, they do believe that that's how they interpret the radio transmissions. And I think they would be credible in the interpretation of those transmissions because they listen to it all the time.
So if he's following them and then he's going to stop and just do like a stop and talk on the street, if he's radioing to dispatch, that adds more time to the clock because he's seen him, he's following him, he's trying to contact dispatch. So that adds at least, maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds roughly, somewhere in that area.
But we do know exactly when that would have been because the radio, when you make a transmission, is documented. Yeah,
do you know at the time?
It was 8 minutes and something after 1.
Okay.
So we don't know. I mean, it's possible he could have seen Oswald that much time earlier somewhere else in that route. And if he's following him, that would make Oswald even more alarmed. And Oswald, this is speculation, of course, would be like, well, hell, that cop's been following me. Maybe he knows something.
Yeah.
I cannot let that cop get me. So then we know what would, of course, happen.
Yeah.
And that goes along with the idea that Oswald possibly might have been followed by Tippett for a little bit.
Yeah, and if he noticed Tippett was following him, maybe he thought, this guy's waiting for backup to arrive before they pounce on me.
Exactly, yeah. Oswald, he was not dumb. He would have known that.
Yep.
This direction and walked 3/5 of a mile to the Texas Theater and arrived sometime before 1:30.
You hear him clocking it. 2, 3, 4.
It's also a useful conclusion.
5.
After all.
That might be where everybody gets that from. I don't know if that was alleged before this film that he gave a coup de grace shot to the head at the end. I don't know where that originated.
You know what? I actually believed that at one time, but now I'm not so sure.
Well, maybe Del Myers investigated it.
Yeah.
Why else would
I'll see
Oswald
what
continue
With
to
Malice
investigate
has to
this
say. I
shot
got me a copy of
for
that.
arrest? Domingo Benavides, closest witness to the shooting, refused to identify Oswald as the killer and was never taken to a lineup.
That's true. However, the Domingo Benavides did come back later, and he told Eddie Barker that on camera, and as you can see it on YouTube today, that it was Oswald. He said he knew exactly who he was.
Mm-hmm. He was never taken to a lineup, but he refused to identify Oswald as the shooter. How could he refuse to identify him if he was never shown a lineup? Like, in real life lineup or even a photo lineup? Or
I don't know, but he can refuse. He can say, I can't pick him. In law enforcement, if it is believed that a person will likely not be able to identify a suspect in a lineup, they won't show the individual lineup.
Yeah.
because it just muddies the waters.
Yeah, and here we see Akilah Clemens. Here she's depicted as being on the porch outside of the house when the shooting occurs. She was not outside the house. She was inside the house and heard the shots and came out to see what was going on. So by the time she got out to where she could see what was going on, Oswald would have been gone by that point.
Those initials are not on the 3 cartridge cases which the Warren Commission present to him.
I've heard this claim too, that he marked the casings with his initials, but when the Warren Commission presented the shells to him, they didn't have that mark on it.
This is what I believe happened. I believe it is procedure for him to do that, but in this case he didn't, and did not want to admit that he did not follow procedure. That's my own suspicion.
And I'll be honest with you, I work in a job where there's procedures and we're supposed to follow procedure, and there's like a step-by-step process in which you're supposed to do things. I'm telling you right now, in real life, procedures often get abbreviated, they often get omitted.
People
often
cut corners all the time.
All the time.
For efficiency.
Yeah, for efficiency's sake. And that's the case not necessarily just with like law enforcement, that's the case with any job. I've seen people cut corners working at fast food restaurants and cafes and shit, you know?
I don't think he said the casings were not the ones he did Poe say those are not the casings I found because mine were marked, or I don't remember marking them. What did he say?
I don't know.
That's
off the top of my head.
Probably need to check that out.
By the time we're done watching this movie, we're gonna have a homework list of all the stuff we need to go checking out.
As early as 12:44, only 14 minutes after the assassination, the police radio put out a description matching Oswald's size and build.
We were there
Oswald
today.
was seen by shoe sales with Johnny Brewer lurking along Jefferson Avenue. Oswald is scared. He begins to realize the full implications of this thing. He goes into the Texas Theater, possibly his prearranged meeting point.
Oh, that was Postal. Just like Jerry said, they covered that in the Oliver Stone film. Julia Postal, you saw her walking out.
Yeah.
Can we rewind that?
Yeah, go for it, bro.
They got it in the film.
Yeah, that's cool. That's in a movie where they don't pay much attention to detail, that's a nice little detail that they included here. She stepped away from the booth for a moment to see what the commotion was going on. Just keep in mind, a cop had just gotten killed like a couple blocks away. So police are all over the place, squad cars are running up and down Jefferson. So she wanted to take a look and be like, hey, what's going on here? So she stepped out of the booth to the curb for a second, and in that second, Oswald managed to slip in undetected.
They're going to show it right now.
Oswald is scared. He begins to realize the full implications of this thing. He goes into
there she is. Look, she's looking like, yeah,
that's
what's
pretty
going
good.
on here? Yeah, that's a nice little touch.
He does not buy the 75-cent ticket.
And he's approaching her out there.
The cashier called the police.
Yeah.
In response to the cashier's call,
Never noticed that until
at
now.
least 30 officers in the fleet of
No, I
patrol
never
cars.
noticed that either. I didn't know that until Jerry told me. I thought she just kind of turned her back for a
That's what I
second.
thought.
Yeah.
Police intuition since the Reichstag fire.
Pause it. It's a bunch of bullshit. The best example of police intuition since the Reichstag fire. That's a bunch of bullshit. A cop, the president has come to town today, so police are on their best behavior. The president got shot and killed. Police are on high alert. Less than an hour later, a uniformed police officer gets shot and killed. Police are on super high alert now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They had raided the library in that neighborhood. They had raided, I believe it was a church basement. And so, I mean, cops are flooding into Oak Cliff from every direction. And dispatch is sending more units, because they know. I think if you want to talk about police intuition, I think the police
Dispatch
intuition...
didn't have to send them. All they had to do was hear on the radio and the cops will automatically go.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
When an officer gets killed, they'll officially send a certain amount of cars through dispatch. Everybody's going to be there anyway.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you shoot a cop, you're going to be seeing a lot more cops in the not too distant future, man. They're coming for you now. But it's like, cops are flooding into this area from every direction. They're raiding a library, raiding a church basement. Like, when you get a report, it wasn't, hey, some guy came into the theater and didn't buy a 75-cent ticket. It was, hey, there's this guy over here. He came into the theater without buying a ticket, and he's acting real suspicious, and he matches the description of the guy that we think you're looking for. See, here's the thing. With civilians like Brewer and Postal, if they had radios, would they know that he matched the description? Or maybe when they called the cops, they're like, well, describe this guy. What does this guy look like? Oh, he looks like this and that. Yeah, we're on our way. Wait for us. We'll be there.
I think they probably... Well, we do know that Brewer was listening to a radio, so he heard the president was shot and probably also heard that the Tippit was shot. And so he's thinking, well, this is nearby. You know, he's kind of alert. So Oswald there acting suspiciously. So he's like, holy shit. I wish I could talk with We should probably should have tried to arrange to interview that guy. That would have been pretty nice.
Is he still around?
He's still living.
Oh man, yeah, we should have tried to reach out and get a hold of him.
He lives in the area too.
Oh wow.
I don't think he lives in Dallas, but he lives somewhere down here in Texas.
Oh yeah.
I was going to say something.
Someone knew Oswald was going to be there.
Oswald himself didn't know he was going to be here.
Points Oswald out.
I don't think he stood up like that. No, there's no escape.
He stood up and switched seats.
When the cops were there?
I think so.
Oh.
Sir, can I get you to stand up? This is it.
He didn't. He did punch the cop, but he pulled the gun out first and tried to shoot him. Buddy, you just punched a cop in the face. That's totally resisting arrest. That's like a textbook example of what resisting arrest is.
By the time he was brought out from the theater, a large crowd is waiting to scream at him. Lee Oswald must have felt like Joseph K. the cop guys at the trial. He's never told the reasons for his arrest. He doesn't know the unseen forces ranging against him. By the time he reached police headquarters, he is booked for murdering Tippit. No legal counsel is provided. No record made of the long questioning. By the time the sun rises the next morning, he is booked for murdering the president. The whole country, fueled by the media, assumes he is guilty. Under the guise of a patriotic nightclub owner out to spare Jackie Kennedy from having to testify at a trial, Jack Ruby is shown into an underground garage by one of his inside men on the Dallas police.
He didn't have to be shown into the garage. He walked down the ramp.
He was brought out like a sacrificial lamb and nicely disposed of as an enemy of the people.
Why didn't they mention that he was at the Western Union office just 3 minutes earlier?
Yeah, on the same block.
I didn't put it together until today either, and I've been to both places. I don't know why I don't remember it being that close to the police department. It is
I
very
didn't think it
close.
was that close because I thought he got back into his car. He did. He got back into his car and he was driving down Main, and then when he saw there was a crowd of people, he's like, oh, what's going on here,
Within minutes, false statements and press leaks about Lee Oswald circulate the globe. The official legend is created and the media takes it from there. The glitter of official lies and the epic splendor of the thought-numbing funeral of JFK confuse the eye and confound the understanding.
Now, I think he's in final summation.
Yeah. Flowery rhetoric.
The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it.
Pause it for a second. The bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. What could possibly be a better example of that than, hey, this simple, straightforward crime that they're telling you this is, that's all a bunch of bullshit. Really, this was a elaborate thing plotted at the highest levels, executed by fanatical, disciplined, cold warriors, and it wasn't one shooter with one gun, it was 3 shooters with 3 guns, or 5 shooters with 5 guns, and this was faked, and that was faked, and these people were killed. It seems like that's really the bigger lie,
I've had people actually say that in the forums, like the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. We know the disparity between what people believe as whether it be a conspiracy or a lone gunman. Most people believe there's a conspiracy. So what you're trying to say actually applies to you.
Yeah.
The bigger the lie, the more people believe it.
It's a projection. You're accusing the government and the official version of the story and lone nutters who support it. You're accusing those actors of being guilty of the exact same thing you're guilty of.
Lee Harvey Oswald, a crazed, lonely man who wanted attention and got it by killing a president, was only the first in a long line of patsies. In later
James Earl
years,
Ray
Robert Kennedy,
got
Martin
caught
Luther
and
King,
got
and his
tried and
commitment
convicted.
to
Sirhan,
changing
I
peace
believe,
would make
pled
them
guilty,
dangerous to
didn't
men
he?
who have committed the war with
So
power.
neither of those guys were patsies.
Also killed by such lonely, crazed men. Men who remove our guilt by making murder a meaningless act of a loner.
Pause it for a second.
We've all
Lonely, crazed men. We have seen so many countless examples of this in our society. Whether it was Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold at Columbine, or Daniel Cho at Virginia Tech, or the Mandalay Bay shooter, or
Xavier, whatever his name is, a few blocks away from here.
yeah, a few blocks away from here in downtown Dallas, there was an angry, lone, crazed guy who shot some cops, you know, and it's like, we've seen more Oswald type characters. Maybe back in 1963, society did not have experience with characters like this, these kind of low grade sociopaths, but today, 50 years later, we have plenty of experience with these guys.
all become Hamlets in our country, children of a slain father leader, whose killer still possessed the throne. The ghost of
Yeah,
John
when
F.
you
Kennedy
see
confronts us
yourself
with the
as
secret
being
murder
Hamlet,
at the heart of the American
impartiality and objectivity
people.
go
It
out the
forces on us
window,
the
you know?
appalling questions of what
And I
is
mean,
our
the thing about the
Constitution made?
Hamlet reference, Hamlet, his dead father comes to him in a dream and tells him, "Avenge my death, your uncle killed me." Dude, you had a dream. That's not proof of anything, you know what I mean?
I'm inadequate on Shakespeare.
Yeah, no, that's
is
what
our
happens. His
citizenship and
uncle
our
kills his
lives
dad,
worth?
and then
What
his
is
dad's
the
ghost
future
comes
of
to him in a dream
democracy
and tells him
where a
about it.
president can be assassinated under conspicuously suspicious circumstances while the machinery of legal action scarcely trembles? How many more political murders disguised as heart attacks, suicides, cancers, drug overdoses? How many airplane and car crashes will occur before they are exposed for what they are?
When there's evidence to expose them for what they are.
Treason
Yeah.
doth never prosper, wrote an English poet. What's the reason? For if it prosper, none dare call it treason. The American public is yet to see
Tommy
this
Lee
approved
Jones,
film.
he's so cool.
Why? The American public is yet to see the real x-rays and photographs of the autopsy. Why?
Because they're private
There
medical
are hundreds
records.
of documents that could help prove this conspiracy. Why are they being withheld or burned by the government?
You just assume that they
Each
exist.
time my office or you, the people, have asked those questions, demanded crucial evidence, the answer from on high has always been national security. What kind of national security do we have when we've been robbed of our leaders? What national security permits the removal of fundamental power from the hands of the American people and validates the ascendancy of invisible government in the United States? That kind of national security, gentlemen of the jury, is when it smells like it, feels like it, and looks like it. You call it what it is. Fascism. I submit to you that what took place on November 22nd, 1963 was a coup d'etat. Its most direct and tragic result was the reversal of President Kennedy's commitment to withdraw from Vietnam.
There was no commitment by Kennedy to
war
withdraw
is the
from
biggest
Vietnam.
business in America
Kennedy, in
with
his
$80
interview with
billion
Walter
a
Cronkite, says
year.
the exact total opposite of that.
President Kennedy was murdered by a conspiracy that was planned in advance at the highest levels of our government, and it was carried out by fanatical and disciplined Cold Warriors in the Pentagon and CIA's covert operation apparatus. Among them, Clay Shaw here before you.
That's my
It was a
favorite line
public
in this whole
execution,
movie.
and it was covered
good.
up by like-minded individuals in the Dallas Police Department, the Secret Service, the FBI, and the White House. All
The
way up
Army,
to
the
including
Navy,
J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Johnson,
The
whom I consider
ARB,
accomplices after
the
the
Warren
fact.
Commission, the Church Committee, the
assassination of
Rockefeller
Mr. President,
Committee, the House Select
the
Committee on
transit-
Assassinations.
His job, his assignment,
Scott
is to
Maudsley's,
speak
the
as
Jim
often as
Hesses.
possible
Yeah.
of this nation's
We
desire
gotta get
for
our
peace,
cut of the
while
action,
he
you know?
acts as a business agent in the
Gotta get those
Congress for the
conspiracy
military and
dollars.
hardware manufacturers. Now, some people say I'm crazy. Southern caricature seeking higher office. Well, there is a simple way to determine if I am paranoid. Let's ask the two men who profited the most from the assassination, your former president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and your new president, Richard Nixon, to release the 51 CIA documents pertaining to Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, or the secret CIA memo on Oswald's activities in Russia that was destroyed while being photocopied. All these documents are yours. The people's property. You pay for it. But because the government considers you children who might be too disturbed or distressed to face this reality, or because you might possibly lynch those involved, you cannot see these documents for another 75 years.
Pause it for a second.
I'm in my early 40s.
You know, it says like these are the people's documents, you pay for them. In an indirect sense, that is true, but it's like saying, you know, the nuclear missiles are the people's missiles, they pay for them. But it's like, are you going to let regular normal people just wander through the missile silos and see the launch codes and all that stuff too? I mean, there are real national security implications here because of Oswald's activities in the Soviet Union and Mexico City and stuff like that. And the CIA doesn't want to openly admit, hey, we're bugging the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, or we have human intelligence sources and signals intelligence sources in the Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico City. And also we had our own human intelligence sources inside the Soviet Union who reported on Oswald during his time there. Yeah, none of that should come out. That is damaging to national security.
And I made the example today about my objection to some of the files being released. Everyone wants everything released. I can understand that. But the government has no obligation to satisfy us by releasing documents that could potentially be harmful to national security. Not just national security, but I think certain individuals' personal security could be compromised, because I gave the example today that they did release files on the CIA's program against Castro, which employed a lot of anti-Castro Cubans. There are ledgers that have been released with these people's names on them, the amount of money they paid, the dates, and everything. And it's a CIA form. You can look those people up on Google now, or however you can track these people down. It would be a very bad thing if there were still people loyal to Castro.
Yeah.
Who would want to go find these people and cause them harm.
Yeah, or also, you know, it could be a case of somebody came into the field office, made a claim this person was involved in the assassination, so we sent resources out to investigate this claim. Turns out it's bunk, there's nothing to it, there's no good reason to think that this person was involved. And all of that is memorialized in FBI documentation, but now there's a bunch of FBI documents with your name on them saying you were investigated as part of the JFK assassination, which you were, but it was only to be like, hey, somebody said this, we investigated, it's not true.
That actually happened to that minister guy who was saying different things he was giving a sermon and was making allegations, and people were listening to it. And it said something about JFK was actually his body was autopsied by the Surgeon General. And that myth got Alex Jones, pushed that out when that first came out, because it was one of the newly released documents. Turns out what it was there's an FBI guy who attended this function where this preacher was giving his speech. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was known back then for giving these, kind of wild speeches. And he made a report about what he heard about this guy alleging that there was the Surgeon General actually performed the autopsy, and he put that in his report. So now that it's released, conspiracists have picked that up and brought it in as part of the conspiracy. Now his body was actually processed by the Surgeon General and not at Bethesda, Maryland.
Yeah, it's just shit people make up, man.
So I'll have shuffled off this mortal coil by then, but I'm already telling my 8-year-old son to keep himself physically fit, so that one glorious September morning in the year 2038, he can walk into the National Archives and find out what the CIA and the FBI knew.
Look at the look on that judge's face. It's like, man, I should have shut this trial down a long time ago.
To son, mother to daughter. But someday, somewhere, someone may find out the damn truth. We better, or we might just as well build ourselves another government, like the Declaration of Independence says, to when the old one ain't working, just a little farther out west. The American naturalist wrote, "A patriot must always be ready to defend his country against its government. I'd hate to be in your shoes today.
That's a very odd
Little
view
lot to
of
think about. You've
patriotism
seen
to
much
take.
hidden evidence the American public has never seen. You know, going back to when we were children, I think that most of us in this courtroom thought that justice came into being automatically. That virtue was its own reward, that good would triumph over evil. But as we get older, we know this just isn't true. Individual human beings have to create justice, and this is not easy. Because the truth often poses a threat to power, and one often has to fight power at great risk to themselves. People like S.M. Holland, Lee Bowers, Gene Hill, Willie O'Keefe have all taken that risk. They've all come forward. I have here some $8,000 in these letters sent to my office from all over the country. Quarters, dimes, dollar bills from housewives, plumbers, car salesmen, teachers, invalids. These are people who cannot afford to send money but do. These are the ones who drive the cabs, who nurse in the hospitals, who see their kids go to Vietnam.
Yeah, you're
Why?
making this into this big thing
they-
that it's not, you know?
Because they want to know the truth.
It's this
Because they want
idea
the country back.
that if only
Because it
things
still
could have been
belongs to us.
different,
As long as
you
the
know,
people have the guts to fight
it's
for
a
what they believe
fool's
in.
errand to think that way. If things were different, things would
The
be
truth is
different.
the most important
you
value
know?
we have.
But they're
Because
not
if the
different.
truth is
We
not
have to deal
adored,
with the version of reality that
if the
actually
government murders
exists,
truth,
not what we
if
would
we
like
cannot
to
respect the
exist
hearts
or
of these
want
people,
to
then this is
exist.
not the country in which I was born in, and it's certainly not the country that I want to die in. Tennyson wrote, "Authority forgets a dying king." This was never more true than for John F. Kennedy, whose murder was probably one of the most terrible moments in the history of our country. You, the people, the jury system sitting in judgment on Clay Shaw, represent the hope of humanity against government power. In discharging your duty and bringing the first conviction in this house of cards against Clay Shaw, that's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Do not forget your dying king. Show this world that this is still a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. Nothing as long as you live will ever be more important. It's up to you.
I'm on the edge of my seat. What's the verdict going to be?
In less than an hour, they came back and acquitted him of all charges.
As the jury reached the verdict,
Yes, we have, Your Honor.
please hand the verdict to the clerk. The defendant, please rise. The clerk will now read the verdict.
New Orleans, Louisiana, March 1st, 1969. We, the jury, find the defendant, Clay Shaw, not guilty.
The Bugliosi Jerry Spence mock trial is always criticized. That it was phony. Spence didn't do a good job. This and that.
We believe there was a conspiracy.
But there was a real trial where conspiracy was tried and conspiracy lost.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't want to count the Bugliosi one as being a real trial, quote unquote, okay, sure. But this one was. This
Yeah,
was a real trial, you know?
In the light of their even questioning the intelligence operations of the United States government.
We understand that the morning paper will call for your resignation, that you're unfit to hold office, that you ruined Clay Shaw's reputation. Mr. Garrison, are you going to resign?
Hell no. I'm going to run again. And I'm going to win.
He did.
Who do you plan to persecute next, Mr. Garrison?
If it takes me 30 years to nail every one of the assassins, then I will continue this investigation for 30 years. I owe that not only to Jack Kennedy, but to the country.
He didn't make any of those comments. He was not in the courtroom when the verdict was read. According to the sources I've gotten this from, he flew into a rage when he was told the verdict. None of that speaks well of Jim Garrison or his character.
Harry Connick Sr. took over as district attorney after Garrison's.
Garrison was. Pause it for a second. The American Bar Association recommended that Garrison be censured for his conduct, and I believe the Louisiana Bar Association actually did censor him for his conduct. What Jim Garrison did was profoundly unethical and a gross, disgusting abuse of power. If ever there was an example of prosecutorial misconduct, this would have to be it. Just a brief note on the end credits here. In 1979, Richard Helms, director of covert operations in 1963, admitted under oath that Clay Shaw had worked for the CIA. That is not true. Clay Shaw did not work for the CIA. He never received a paycheck from the CIA. He was not a CIA agent. Clay Shaw reported to the Domestic Contact Division. All the things he reported on had to do with business matters in Latin America and Europe.
And it was like 20 years earlier.
It was, I think it began 20 years earlier. I think the last time he reported was in like 1953 or 1955, so a decade before the assassination was the last time we know Clay Shaw had contact with the CIA. But he had contact with the CIA in the capacity of a civilian reporting to like an agency that contacted civilians who traveled abroad to report on conditions there. Clay Shaw died in 1974 of lung cancer. No autopsy was allowed. Pause it there. There was no autopsy for Clay Shaw because Clay Shaw was dying of lung cancer. He was being attended to by a physician, and this physician saw him waste away. Clay Shaw died in his home, and his death was not unexpected at all. So in a situation like that where you're receiving palliative care because you're at the end of your life, they are expecting you to die relatively soon, and then you die as expected. There's no need for an autopsy because your death is not mysterious or violent or unexpected or accidental or any of those things. He died of lung cancer, and his doctor knew that he had cancer and was caring for him at the end of his life. That's why there was no autopsy. It says no autopsy was allowed. That implies that somebody wanted to do an autopsy,
right,
but they were stopped from doing that. That's not the case.
Right. In 1978, Jim Garrison was elected judge of Louisiana State Court of Appeal in New Orleans. He was re-elected in 1988. To this date, he has brought the only public prosecution in the Kennedy killing.
Which he lost.
Probably because no one else is crazy enough to falsely charge someone of high stature. That's probably the reason why.
Yeah. I mean, there's no good reason to bring a criminal prosecution. You know, it mentions Southeast Asia, 2 million Asian lives lost. Actually, it's closer to 3 million. 58,000 American lives lost, 220 billion spent, 10 million Americans airlifted there by commercial aircraft. 10 million Americans, more than 5,000 helicopters lost, 6.5 million tons of bombs dropped. A congressional investigation from 1976 to 1979 found a probable conspiracy in the assassination of John F. Kennedy and recommended the Justice Department investigate further. As of 1991, the Justice Department has done nothing. The files of the House Select Committee on Assassinations are locked away until the year 2029. Okay, as for Vietnam was like a 20-year affair where the Americans took over after the French. American involvement, like direct involvement in Vietnam, goes back to the World War II era when OSS was teaming up with Ho Chi Minh and Le Duan to fight the Japanese. The whole Vietnam era was covered by 5 presidential administrations from both parties. You can't just put... I don't think it's fair to put the entire blame for Vietnam on Lyndon Johnson. Yeah, he escalated it dramatically, but that trend was well underway by the time Lyndon Johnson ascended to the presidency. That trend had already been going on for about 15, 20 years at that point. And even after Lyndon Johnson's time would continue for another half a decade where they were trying to dial it back because up to the Johnson era is escalating, and then it peaks in the Johnson era, and then after that it falls off,
Right.
and eventually they end up cutting their losses in 1975 and just getting out. The congressional investigation they're referencing, this is the HSCA. They're just telling you the HSCA found a probable conspiracy. They're not telling you the HSCA totally said Oswald did this, that Oswald shot Kennedy and Tippit, that the HSCA pretty much got behind all the conclusions of the Warren Commission, and it doesn't mention anything about the acoustics evidence, doesn't mention anything that even then the acoustics evidence was debunked by the National Academy of Sciences. So I mean, it's there's so many logical fallacies going on here that it's hard to keep track of all of them. You've got quote mining, you've got straw man arguments, you've got lies by omission, you've got outright lies, you've got moving the goalposts. There's so much shit going on here that my mind can't absorb it all. This movie is a good example of a gish gallop. Just keep throwing stuff at the audience so that they don't have time to process it. And the second you get one thing out there, give them like a second or two, and then quickly move on to the next thing.
Right.
Next thing, you know?
Well, that's why it took this long to address most of these issues. We couldn't even address them all.
Yeah.
If we
couldn't
had
address them all.
I would if I could pick, like, have a choice of about 10 people, I think I could have enough to come in here and we could debunk the whole entire thing. Every single aspect we could probably debunk. There's people who sway towards certain types of evidence, certain things. I tend to like to study the acoustic side, not the acoustic side, but the ballistic side. So for me, it's easy to debunk those things. You know the historical side and a lot of the political side of things. It's easy for you to go for those. But I wish I could assemble a good, probably not even 10 people, maybe 5.
Mm.
We could tear this movie. We could really rip it apart to shreds. Like every little minute thing that they got wrong, we could probably do that. But as far as the probable conspiracy, as you said, that is primarily based on the acoustic evidence. Now there is some speculation and some suggestion, which comes from Robert Blakey, that the mob was involved, and he really wanted to steer the investigation in that direction. Most people don't agree with him on that there's not really enough evidence to suggest that the mob was even involved. But the acoustic panel did conclude that there were 4 shots on the dicta belt. It has been totally debunked. It's later been determined that the sounds on the dicta belt are just sounds that will appear as noise on the dicta belt. There are not only 4, there are many others. There are 4 prominent ones that the acoustic team thought matched the films, corresponding to shots as they interpreted the film. We know now that the acoustic evidence, or the actual recording, was not even made at the time of the shooting, but probably about a minute later, because it corresponds with Chief Decker's instructions to his people to search a particular area of Dealey Plaza. And when he said that, it occurred approximately 1 minute after the assassination.
Yeah.
And we have at least 3 that I'm aware of, scientific, peer-reviewed analysis of the dicta belt, which debunk the assertion that the sounds were recorded. You mentioned the National Academy of Sciences. That's one of them. I think that was in 81 or 82. The FBI did one, and they refuted the acoustic analysis from the HSCA. And there was an extremely in-depth, comprehensive one done by a team assembled by Larry Sabato. And they go very in-depth with their analysis and methodology. I would highly recommend anyone to check that one out.
Yeah, if you have any interest in the acoustics evidence whatsoever, definitely check that out. The Sona Analyst study, it's available. It's online, the whole thing. You can find it. I found it. And thanks to that study, which is very technical, very advanced, we now know today that the source of the audio recording on the dictabout, the acoustics evidence, that came from a stationary motorcycle that was at the Trade Mart. Like, it wasn't even part of the motorcade. So, you know, first they proposed that the stuck microphone was one cop, and then a couple of years later, or many years later, the lone nutter said no, it was actually another different cop in the motorcade. And then decades after that, we actually learned the real truth. No, it wasn't either of those guys. It was another third cop who wasn't even in the motorcade. He was at the Trade Mart.
The first one they thought it to be was H.B. McLean, and when here's another way they debunked it. Dale Myers actually debunked it because he synchronized, I think, 4 or 6 films, and at the time of the shots, McLean is not even where he needs to be for the acoustics results, because they placed the open microphone at a certain position on Houston Street, turning onto Elm Street. The motorcycle would have, according to their analysis, would have had to been somewhere in that location. Well, on the synchronized films that Dale Myers assembled, it totally shows McLean just starting out from Main Street onto Houston, like a block away when the shooting happens. And I think the Hughes film debunks it all by itself, because you can see McLean in the film, and while you're watching McLean, the shooting is going on, and McLean is way back here on Main Street. And you don't even need 3 or 4 films. You can just look at one film, and that's the Hughes film, and debunk it on your own. But I have to give credit to the person who brought it to light that the impulse sounds occurred long after the shots, not long after, maybe a minute after, when Sheriff Decker is giving his people instructions, and that's Steve Barber. Yeah. Because Steve Barber was the first person to know this, because he studied and listened until he, on the, what was it, you could buy like a record.
It was like a 45. They were those little records, and I think it might have been in a copy of, it was in some magazine. It might have been Rolling Stone or something. I'm not sure which magazine, which publication it was exactly, but they included a little 45, and those were the little small vinyl records. And I think it was some record players, a
flimsy plastic one from that era.
Yeah, it wasn't even like a good vinyl record. They were giving it away for free in a magazine, you know, so it wasn't like the best audio quality to begin with. But I mean, even the recording itself, like, it was a blunt stylus on a rotating wax drum. So it's like, that's not even a good recording to begin with. So when you have second, third, fourth generation versions of that recording, like, the quality decreases with each subsequent generation, you know? Steve Barber probably heard like a second or third generation version of that.
And Steve Barber, he's just a regular guy. He's a musician. He's a drummer. If it was a conspiracy, why would they have a person like Steve Barber be part of a conspiracy to keep the conspiracy together? Yeah. Like, why would they have him listening to some cheap radio or a cheap disc that comes with a magazine, being the person to discover that Chief Decker is speaking, and the impulse sounds are happening while he's talking? Why would it be a person like Steve Barber? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And I don't even know where we would be if we didn't have that happen, because it's because of Steve Barber that the National Academy of Sciences did their research and affirmed what he had heard. Mm-hmm. So we know from multiple sources now that the acoustics are...
It's just bum. There never was anything to it, and with that goes the whole conspiracy house of cards. That's the problem with the house of cards. All it takes is pulling out one card and the whole thing comes tumbling down, you know what I mean? That's what happens when you build something on a shaky foundation, you know? And it's like, were it not for the acoustics evidence, the HSCA would have solidly gotten behind all the conclusions of every other investigation. I mean, they did.
Because actually they did.
They did. They got behind those conclusions, and then almost as like an afterthought, they added, oh, well, there was a probable conspiracy because we think there was a fourth shot. But today we know that that's wrong.
And the end of the credits here, that, you know, the way it reads, they don't even tell you the whole story of the HSCA's conclusion. Yeah. Because they concluded Oswald fired the shots that hit people. Yep. And it doesn't say that there.
And then they explicitly say the following groups were not involved in the assassination. Then they list all the groups commonly accused of involvement in the assassination, you know? The following groups were not involved: the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service, the Dallas Police, the Soviet Union, the Cubans.
So
That's everyone.
Oliver Stone doing precisely what he accuses the government of doing, and that's suppressing and omitting evidence. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what he's doing here.
Yeah, and that's, in my experience, that's often what conspiracy theorists do. There's an old expression. It goes, a lie can race around the world before the truth has time to put its shoes on. And what Fred and I have been doing in watching this movie, I think, is a perfect example of that. I'm looking at the display on the DVD player right now. We're at 3 hours and 20 minutes, and I'm telling you, I've got like 6 hours of audio recording. So for every 1 hour of movie, we have 2 hours of us commenting about it, you know?
And we're coming up to the very end on this. There is a quote on the end of this that really had me, it captured my heart when I was a younger man, and I think it spoke to me, and it seemed like it was directed at me, and it says, "Dedicated to the young whose spirit the search for truth marches on." I felt that they were talking directly to me.
Yeah. Well, well, like, I didn't know this prior to tonight, but you and I are from different generations. And when they talked in the 1960s and 1970s, in the future we'll have all this analytical technology, in the future we'll know all these things. The future is now. It's the year 2018. We're at the end of 2018. And with each passing day, with each passing year, month, decade, whatever, it doesn't seem like we're ever going to get closer to actually knowing the truth of what happened, because the reality is we knew the truth of what happened within the first 48 hours, and people just couldn't deal. They just couldn't deal with it. So they went looking for something that was more pleasing to them and something that would satisfy their emotions better, you know? Dedicated to the young in whose spirit the search for truth marches on. I was one of those people. When this movie came out in 1992, I was 8 years old. And I was young, and I saw that quote too. And when I believed in the conspiracy, I get what you're saying. It was like it was speaking to me. But a lot of time has passed between 1992 and 2018. If you want to be generous with the term young, you could say that I'm still young. But the conspiracy theorists failed to convince me. They didn't convince me. And what we kind of see happening now is the trend is away from conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories are so ubiquitous in our culture that a lot of people have an instinctual reaction to just discard them outright, because there's always conspiracies and there's always people saying conspiracy and everything's a conspiracy. Somebody said to Fred James today that you believe the California wildfires are really happening. Like, there's nothing that's not a conspiracy anymore.
I was not going to even entertain that either. I just act like you didn't even
just
say it.
move on.
I said, let's talk about Kennedy here.
Yeah. Well, because it's stupid. It's stupid, you know. And I mean, you know, think about Hurricane Katrina. There's conspiracy theories associated with that. You know, it's like it's input overload. You know, like, not everything is a conspiracy. And the honest truth is, conspiracies that actually exist in reality are few and far between, because they're hard. They require the efforts of multiple people, and people have to do their things perfectly, and they're entirely contrary to human nature. From history, we have plenty of examples of conspiracies that failed. And I mean, look at the example of the Hosty note. There was, 3 people that knew about that? And it wasn't even a big thing. Nobody got killed. They just destroyed one handwritten note.
And they could have never said anything about it.
Yeah, it was something, and they couldn't even cover that up. I was saying to Rob Clark, you know, we know things about the American government. The American government couldn't cover up their involvement at the Bay of Pigs, couldn't cover up their involvement in plots to assassinate Castro, plots to overthrow governments in all over the world, really, but primarily in South and Central America. Bill Clinton couldn't cover up cheating on his wife. You know, how could you guys have possibly covered up something as intricate and elaborate as this? It's just not believable. To quote Kevin Costner as Jim Garrison, I find it simply not believable. It's not believable. This does not match with the reality I know and I deal with every single day of my life. You know, it doesn't seem possible to me. However, one guy taking his gun to work and shooting somebody with it, that sounds believable. I have plenty of examples of stuff like that happening in real life.
It is just as simple as that. As a guy going to work and firing his rifle while the president's driving by.
Yeah. I mean, take away the high stature of the victim and take away the drama surrounding this event, and at its heart, it's a very simple story. A guy took his gun to work and shot somebody with it. Give it a couple weeks, we'll hear that story again. We have heard that story many times in our society, and we will hear it many more times, you know? It's a rare event, yeah, but it's not that rare.
Well, we have criticized this movie and spent more than 6 hours doing it. But I think we both agree that it's probably among our favorite movies.
Ironically, yeah.
Yeah, this is one of the...
This is my favorite movie.
This is up there among my favorite movies. And there was a time where it was my favorite. It's dropped off a couple notches, but I still think it's a great film. And we have criticized it to death, but there are a few times where I give credit to what Oliver Stone has done. Because if you consider this quote here, I'm going to read it. I believe this part of it is mostly true. It says, as a result of this film, Congress in 1992 passed legislation to appoint a panel to review all files and determine which ones would be made available to the American public. This has actually come to pass. We know about the Assassination Records Review Board. This has actually happened, and as a result, there have been most of the files have been released, although there are some that are still being retained. I think in due time, the rest of them will be released. So I think that's one good thing that come out of this film. There's been such an outrage that Congress actually had to do something about the outrage, and we are able to now see some of the files. Now, do I think they should release all files? No, I think there's still some files that are probably sensitive. I gave an example of those today. But ultimately, I do believe that that was one good thing that this film helped accomplish, and we are able to get access to some limited material.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in 2018, very few files remain to be released as a percentage of like the total amount of files. A case like this could potentially generate millions and millions of files, and over the decades, I think like 99% of those files have been released. They're only holding on to the last few, and it probably has to deal with matters of operating procedure, what's sometimes referred to as TTP, tactics, techniques, and procedures. It probably has to do with signals intelligence and humans intelligence that we got from the Soviet Union and from Cuba and from Mexico City. The stuff that they're still holding on to probably has nothing to do with the actual assassination itself, just with events surrounding it. So it's like...
And there's not going to be a smoking gun. It's not going to be like, okay, here's Oswald's tax return, which shows...
he was working for the CIA.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like... when they do release, if they happen to release everything, people are just going to say, well, you didn't release the real evidence that shows how Oswald was an operative for the CIA.
Yeah.
So there's not going to be satisfaction.
Well, I mean, we saw it when we were talking to conspiracy theorists in the plaza. They just insist everything's been destroyed, everything's been suppressed. So even if they said, okay, that's it, here's the last of the documents, we literally have nothing left, they'll say you're lying. You're lying. You destroyed them. You're still hiding them, or they'll say whatever they need to say to keep their faith alive. Because at the end of the day, these beliefs are beliefs based on faith. Faith is belief without evidence, or sometimes in spite of evidence. You know what I mean?
That's a good point.
Okay, we've gotten 6 hours in this. We have one more thing to do. The deleted scene where Lee Harvey Oswald testifies. I guess he testifies for the prosecution in the Clay Shaw trial. So it's the ghost of Lee Harvey Oswald. We got to get to that. I'm just going to stop this video. If anybody actually watched this whole thing with us and went through it all, I tip my hat to you. That's very commendable. That's very commendable. You're a real deal nerd, just like me and my buddy Fred. All right, you want to navigate to the main menu and find that? I'm just going to stop this recording and do another little one for the one scene we're going to watch. Thank you for joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did.